Running.
Okay,
Yes. Okay.
we're getting there.
Good afternoon to everyone. We are going to do something a little different today. We're going to be looking at the covenant in particular with Abraham. What is the covenant that Abraham has gotten? If you were here on Shabbat, you would have gotten a few clues of this because we talked about it a little bit.
Hashem will give him Israel.
Right. Okay.
Oh.
So the covenant with Abraham includes Israel, or the land that will become known as Israel because his grandson hasn't been born yet. What else is involved?
Make of you a great nation,
Okay.
Nation.
right?
Great nation,
Your
or
descendants will-
indeed, perhaps even plural, that there will be nations that come from you, which is definitely true. And
Right.
what else?
Children.
Yeah, your
Okay.
descendants will be as numerous as the stars in the sky.
Numerous?
You read the book.
Yeah, it was a long time ago.
Right, and along with all of this also comes the promise of a great name, right? And there's no way to really abbreviate this. You will be a blessing. All right, so this is great, but Brit means covenant, and a covenant means that there is some relationship. So God is on the line for a lot. What about us?
Got to do what he says.
Oh, okay.
The mitzvah.
Are there mitzvot yet?
Not yet.
No, but it's here.
We have no Torah.
We have no Torah
We have
yet,
no Torah.
right?
But he has it here, Abraham.
Oh, Abraham has all the commandments here,
Yeah.
right?
He already knows them.
Yeah.
No, because when the angels visited him, he served milk and meat to them together.
Yeah, because it wasn't a law yet.
Yeah. Although technically, as the sages will point out, he served milk and meat.
That's right, he served the
So-
It's true.
It's okay.
The order was better.
And they waited 3 hours.
Yeah,
Well, milk can come first anyway.
he can come first. You only need half an hour after milk.
Technically less by the Talmud, at least. Custom is longer. But the idea of those mitzvot is never formally enumerated,
No.
right? Except for one.
What?
The phrase.
Oh,
Brit.
Milah.
Milah,
Milah.
right.
All right.
Circumcision.
Right. So Milah means circumcision. Right. So Brit Milah means a circumcision of the covenant. And it's unusual that we have a mitzvah that has the title covenant within its own title, rather than just saying it's Milah. Right? When we say, the mitzvah of taking the extra bread, the dough from the bread that you make, we call that, challah. We don't say it's Brit challah. Right? We don't put that. When we say you're wearing the tefillin, we don't call it Brit tefillin. But when it comes to Milah, circumcision, we call it Brit Milah. Now, part of this is a little just phonetic, not phonetic, but linguistic, that circumcision is circumcision. And circumcision was not exclusively practiced by the Jewish people during the time of Abraham and even later in history. And so you had to point out that this was not just any old circumcision, it was for the purposes of Brit. But the same could be said of what we eat. Other people eat much the same we eat. That doesn't make every meal a Brit seudah. That it's a seudah of the Brit. There's something else. So why would Milah be so important? And we're going to look at that. And we're going to look at some of the details of Milah in particular, because most of us know the word circumcision and know very little about what is involved in the process. So in order to do that, however, I have to beg your indulgence because there was too much I wanted to do last week. Technically in chapter 17 of the Genesis, which is Lech Lecha. So now you have to hold on of how I get from Vayera back to Lech Lecha. Okay, and it's not just flipping the page, because we got to do justice to Vayera at least a little bit. So page 99, chapter 18, verse 1. The rabbinic sleight of hand, and I am not the inventor of this. This is a well-honored midrash. Right, so we're on page 99 in the 8th time, but it's chapter 18, verse 1.
Oh.
All right, and Harriet, I'm looking to you because I want to get rolling on this.
The Lord appeared to him by the taverns of Mamre. He was sitting at the entrance of the tent as the day grew hot.
Good, that's all we need.
So all
right, so how do we get from there back to Milah? Well, according to the rabbis, God is appearing to Abraham at precisely the time when he needs it most, when he is being comforted. He is doing Bikur Cholim, because Abraham is recovering from Milah, which took place at the very end of Lech Lecha in chapter 17. So the rabbis say, why would Abraham just be sitting there at his tent? Why would he be lounging around? Abraham's not a lounger by nature. Well, because he's still physically recovering from the surgery. That this is like on the 3rd day, and he is sitting there still trying to be hospitable. But, you know, it's not easy. And remember, this is in days before anesthetic. And if you need an example of how bad Milah can be in those days for an adult, and Abraham is an old man at this time, pardon Abraham, read the story of Shechem from the rape of Dinah, when the circumcision of the males in the town was sufficiently debilitating that Levi and Shimon were able to come through and kill them all. So that's why Abraham needs a little company, is because he is recovering from this process. So that means you have to go back and see what was it that he did that has rendered him needing of attention. How's that work? Yes? Our segue go okay? Okay. So we're going to go ahead and begin on verse 9 of chapter 17, where God further said to Abraham.
As for you, you and your offspring to come throughout the ages shall keep my covenant. Such shall be the covenant between me and you and your offspring to follow, which you shall keep. Every male among you shall be circumcised. You shall circumcise the flesh of your foreskin, and that shall be the sign of the covenant between me and you. And throughout the generations, every male among you shall be circumcised at the age of 8 days. And for the homeborn slave and the one bought from an outsider who is not of your offspring, they must be circumcised, homeborn and purchased alike. Thus shall my covenant be marked in your flesh as an everlasting pact. And if any male who is uncircumcised fails to circumcise the flesh of his foreskin, that person shall be cut off from his kin. He has broken my covenant.
All right, pause there. So what's the mitzvah?
Circumcision.
Circumcision, Milah. Now, Abraham is 99 years old when this is happening, and taking care of all of this. And as we can see, this is going to happen when he's an old man, but from now on, it's going to be on the 8th day. Make sense?
Right, even though his son Ishmael was 13 at the time, still
Yes.
from now on, it's going to be on the 8th day.
Exactly right, exactly right. And we'll see that, you know, later in the story. We're going to go ahead and get the handouts around. Most of these come from Rambam's Mishnah Torah. The one that doesn't is marked by Radak, but the first one is as well. We're actually beginning at the very end of the Mishnah Torah because Rambam does a very interesting, he draws our attention to something very interesting with his first comment, which is actually his last comment on the subject of Milah.
If I may.
Yes, please.
Step 0 symbol. Not like a tattoo.
We're going to get to that. We're going to get to the commentary, and then we can chime in with our own feelings as well. But I want to start off with first this question of primacy. There's something very odd about the way this is formulated in terms of it's so central to the idea. So, but the Radak question, the Radak quote, is actually going to come back to the question of why that? You know, how about just grow your pinky nail longer? So why not something different? So let's get Rambam first. Oh.
The Torah mentions only 3 covenants regarding all its mitzvot, as Deuteronomy states. These are the words of the covenant that God commanded, in addition to the covenant that he established with you in Horeb.
That's true.
And Deuteronomy also states, you are all standing today to enter into a covenant with God, your Lord. Thus, there are 3 covenants.
Right, so 3 statements of covenantal nature with regards to commandments. Right, God talks about the covenant generically, but when it comes to commanding, there's only these 3 usages of the word brit, of covenant, except for when we get to Milah, except for this particular mitzvah. So all the other mitzvahs, they get mentioned with the idea of covenant 3 times. Milah, how many?
In contrast, 13 covenants were established with Abraham, our patriarch, with regard to circumcision.
Right, that is to say, the term brit is used 13 times. I don't know if you were noticing that as we were reading through that piece of text. The word covenant came up an awful lot. It was kind of like heavy-handed editing. That's covenant, 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 covenant. And just for our edification, here's the list.
First, I will place my covenant between me and you. I behold, my covenant is with you. Will establish my covenant between me and you for an eternal covenant, and you shall observe my covenant. This is my covenant which you shall observe. It will be a sign of the covenant. We're up to number 11, aren't we?
No, that's verse 11.
Oh, verse 11. Oh, that I can't remember. My covenant will be in your flesh for an eternal covenant. He will have nullified my covenant, and I will establish my covenant with him for an eternal covenant, my covenant with Isaac. 13 times.
13 times in less than, in about 20 verses. Actually, a little bit, literally 20 verses. Right? So almost every verse mentions the word covenant. Some of them mention the word covenant more than once. So there is something especially covenantal going on in this Brit Milah. And this is just to highlight that relationship even more clearly. We sort of started off with just the linguistic oddity. Here we are now in the textual oddity. Again, when God's telling us not to murder, he's not using the term covenant over and over again. When God tells us to keep Shabbat, he's not using the term covenant over and over again. And yet Brit Milah, it's just covenant crazy. All right, so Radak's going to give us one explanation of the difference between this and other things.
Although there are other symbolic acts which are signs of the covenant and the obligation to keep the laws of the Torah, such as tefillin, tzitzit, Shabbat, etc.
Pause. So symbolic act, an oath, is a technical term in Judaism. You guys know the song Vishamru, right? Ot hi le'olam, right? Shabbat is an eternal sign between me and the people of Israel. That is what we sing when we sing Vishamru every Friday. And the other times we recite it as well. It's a sign. That is to say, it is a symbol. When we observe Shabbat, when we experience Shabbat, it's not just about keeping the commandment. It's not just about the joy that we feel. It is a reminder of this covenant between us and God. Shabbat itself, the temporal time, is that reminder. The same way that an anniversary is a reminder of the marriage covenant between 2 loving partners. When you're in that zone, you're reminded of it. We get a reminder every week. Anniversaries are every year. The same thing with both tefillin, which are also called, there should be an ot, a sign before your eyes. This is a reminder of the covenant. In addition to just being a mitzvah in quotes, they also have the symbolic reminding role to play. And the tzitzit as well. You'll look upon them and you will remember my commandments. These are symbols of the covenant in broad ways. So we've got lots of symbols of the covenant. Brit Milah seems to be outshining them all.
Right, this symbol, Brit Milah, is by far the most potent one, the only one to be performed on one's body. The other signs are only a reminder.
Right? So what's the contrast between Brit Milah and all these other signs?
Something that you do outside you, but this is
On your
etched
body.
into this, on your body. This is cut into your skin.
Shabbat comes and goes.
Yeah.
It's permanent, right? Tefillin,
Permanent,
we don't tie the tefillin under our arm and then like staple it there, right? It goes on, it comes off. Tzitzit, yes, we wear them, but we take them off as well. They are not permanently affixed. Brit Milah is permanent beyond measure, right? There is no, there's no takebacks. There's no do-over. It is a permanent sign of the covenant. And now, having made that point, Radak then shifts to why, if you're going to make a permanent sign of the covenant, why make it there, of all places?
Seeing that it's permanent, the Torah chose to select the reproductive organ of the male, seeing that most of the sins one commits are somehow related to this organ and involve misuse of that organ. It is the organ which, unless handled with care, is apt to allow the bestial party of the human being.
Sorry, that should be part.
Oh, bestial part, okay.
The bestial party is a whole different kind of issue.
Yes, we're thinking about the parties, that's right.
Yeah.
The bestial part of the human, that organ, unless you handle it with care, is apt to allow the bestial part of the human being to come to the surface, thereby weakening the aspect of our nature which wishes to cling to godliness.
Right? So it's not that it changes the organ. It's not that it somehow makes it more tractable, manageable, or less likely to lead us to digression. But by permanently marking that which is very often leading us towards these trouble, we are going to be reminded at precisely the moment when we need it, when we look and see the sign of the covenant, when we are reminded at that moment of the Brit itself. It is sort of the ultimate firewall, if you will, of think about what you're about to do with this, or think about what this is encouraging you to do. Whether it be, the direct act of being with someone that you shouldn't, or whether it be the indirect act of doing stupid or illegal things to impress people that you would like to be with, or all of the other things that get tied up into the frustrations of this. That Radak precedes Freud by hundreds of years of thinking that most of our ills are tied up in this particular part of our body. But it is interesting to see that he has that idea. Now, psychology aside, the underlying theme here of this is a part that often will make us or encourage us to behave on a more material way, I think is a very important reminder that we are not supposed to get rid of our material self. We are not meant to be celibate. We are not supposed to go live in monasteries. We don't live in caves isolated from other people. But we are supposed to be in charge of our material self. That it not become there's a party outside, that it not become a barrier towards our ability to cling to God, that it not become a very powerful distraction away from godliness. Brit Milah, important. The only permanent sign that we make, the only permanent change that we make to a Jewish body, and the only one that's commanded to be made on the Jewish body, was made in particular on this particular part of the body because that particular part was considered expendable, unlike everything else on the human body. So, if you tattoo your arm, which is permanent, well, your arm is not expendable, and now you've damaged a necessary part of your body. That particular extra piece of flesh was considered to be not of any consequence. And therefore, the removal of it was also one of the only options for how you could make a permanent sign flesh. Questions, comments, reflections? Okay. How does it work? Now we're back into Rambam, and now we're going to go more in his order.
Circumcision is a positive mitzvah.
Right, remember, positive mitzvah doesn't mean, yay, positive. Positive mitzvah means, thou shalt do this, as opposed to negative mitzvahs, thou shalt not. Give us a little air now that the door had to be closed because of loudness in the hallway. All right, so it's a positive mitzvah, and?
It is punishable by karet.
Correct, which we just read, which is if you don't do it, you are out. Right? You are out of the community, which the rabbis understood to mean you are not just out of the town, but you are cut off spiritually in every possible way. So karet is considered to be the worst punishment available. it is considered to be a worse punishment than capital punishment, than execution. So that is how serious the Torah and our tradition has taken circumcision. It's one of the reasons why Jews have fought, lobbied, and often had to die in order to try and continue to circumcise their children. And in case you're not aware, there is a fairly large lobbying group right now in this country and Europe that is working very hard to make circumcision illegal. And so we do still need to be very much on the watch for this. They're trying to make it so that you cannot circumcise a child, that you can only have circumcision done as elective surgery when you're 18. As a consenting adult is the phrase that they're using. And they very erroneously try to use the female genital mutilation, which is deliberately designed to maim, mar, and diminish women as a parallel. And really, there is no parallel between the two.
And actually, it turns out medically circumcision is a very positive thing to do in a lot of ways.
Right. I mean, the evidence keeps going, up and down depending upon which study you read, but on the balance, it seems to be good. And we don't need to rely on the medical journals to tell us that it's positive to know that for us, it's a positive mitzvah. Yes. And therefore, we would still do it even if there was no medical benefit to be found. But for other people who aren't Jewish, they may want to read those research journals as well.
It turned out that it was the opposite. That it did affect something.
Something harmful.
That it was somehow harmful?
Yeah.
Then I would definitely want to still see more studies and more studies and more studies, because as we know, the studies come and go for many of these topics, and many of them are already prejudicial when they start, which is very unfortunate. And we're not asking the rest of the world to take up circumcision as something they should do as well. That was a really weird period in the US history where that became the norm. But we're simply being asked to be allowed to continue our own tradition, which has been for 3,000 years and wasn't being given to us as a medical directive, but was given to us as a ultimate sign of the covenant. And yes, we do have sort of practical evidence that, you know what, we're still here. So if you have an entire population of circumcised male and we haven't all died out in 3,000 years, especially given the challenges we've faced, apparently this does not actually prevent any sort of life expectancy from being normal. All right, so let's get on with that.
So a father is commanded to circumcise his son, and a master his slaves. This applies both to those who are born in his home and to those purchased by him.
No, that's the slave side.
Right. If the father or the master transgressed and did not circumcise them, he negated the fulfillment of a positive commandment. He is not, however, punished by karet, for karet is incurred only by the uncircumcised person himself.
Now go ahead and read the next sentence, and then we're going to try and figure what that means.
The court is obligated to circumcise that son or slave at the proper time and should not leave an uncircumcised male among the Jewish people or their slaves.
But they mean Hebrew slaves, right?
No, all of them.
No, all slaves. Now, this is not really an operative and hasn't been operative for almost 2,000 years. We haven't really had slaves in the Jewish world. But yes, anybody who was in the household, and I didn't put every part of Mishnah Torah here on this topic because it's not of practical benefit to us, but there are different people who are temporarily coming and going that aren't necessarily going to be circumcised. But yes, somebody who is part of the household home would need to be circumcised, full stop. Yeah, this was a non-negotiable. And as you can see, if some guy stood up in the middle of the community and said, well, I'm not going to circumcise my little Tommy, I'm just not going to do it, the court is authorized to circumcise the son, even though it's against his wishes, because it is a mitzvah for the child to be circumcised. It is a positive mitzvah to do it, but it is more a mitzvah to be circumcised. Got the right? So the let me see if I can draw a diagram of the mitzvah, not the act.
And this is although the slave is not obligated to the rest of the mitzvot. He could eat a bacon and egg sandwich, or he's not obligated. It's not a sign of the covenant between him and God.
It's a sign of the covenant of the community. Right. So you have a child. That's why it's small, and then you have the father. right? The child is the one who has the mitzvah, right? It is a mitzvah that he be circumcised. When he's 8 days old, he can't do that for himself, no matter how you want to stretch your imagination. And so the father facilitates the performance of that mitzvah by either doing it himself or engaging a moil, somebody who is skilled in doing this, and taking care of the act. That makes sense? Mm-hmm. If the father chooses not to, that's why he's not punishable by karet. Even though he should, because the mitzvah is attached to the child, it's not the father that becomes punishable by karet. But it is why let's see if we can do a court, we'll use 3 symbolically, that's why the court can step in and do the circumcision to make sure the child is not going to be held accountable for his lack of circumcision. Does that logic make sense?
Let's say somebody owned a slave. Does the slave owner do it or the father do it? And if the father doesn't want to do it, can the slave owner do it instead of the court?
Yes. I mean, if it's a Hebrew child, then it should be circumcised by the father on the 8th day. If the father then subsequently had to sell their kid into indentured servitude, which was the typical form, then the kid would have already been circumcised. If he hadn't been circumcised, and he was a Hebrew person, and when he arrived, then obviously the new owner would circumcision. If it was a Gentile that was being either born to Gentiles in the household, then yes, the child would be circumcised on the 8th day. And if they were being brought into the household at an older age, they would be circumcised when they came in. Okay, but on this point of circumcising somebody against the parents' wishes, we continue in the next paragraph.
We may not circumcise a person's son without his knowledge, unless he has transgressed and did not circumcise him. Then the court must circumcise against the father's will.
Okay, so it's a little complicated. Let me try and work this out, because we don't want to supersede the family's obligation and the family's role in circumcision. So if the father hasn't refused to circumcise the child, the court doesn't intervene. And the court intervenes in the sense that they encourage and try to convince the father to do so, but the court doesn't take the child and circumcise it just because day 9 has come around and the father hasn't done it yet. On the other hand, if the father has refused to circumcise the child, saying, I will not do this, and the court has said, yes, but you must, and he says, no, I'm not, never, no how, then yes, the child is taken and circumcised, whether the father likes it or not. Because why should the child be deprived of this mitzvah just because the father is being intransigent? Right? We are acting on behalf and for the benefit of the infant, even if the parents aren't. Now, I know in our modern open society, we're probably a little squirming in our seats about this notion of, well, tough. We're taking your kid and doing what's best. But we do have similar issues that come up in the modern world when it comes to some types of medical care for infants and children under the age. Some people say we will not allow certain types of medical care, we won't allow blood transfusions, other things. And our state continually says, yes, you will. We will actually, for certain types of basic health care, to make sure that child can not suffer. And as the lack of milah is considered to be a huge detriment to the child, our community as well will act to make sure the child doesn't suffer just because the parents are having issues. I should point out, of course, in our modern society, we lack the authority and jurisdiction in order to implement this. So although it is technically on the books, I have not heard of a single family or a single community that has gone in, kicked down the door, taken the child, and done the circumcision. But it's important to understand it simply to highlight the importance that milah is felt to be in the issue of milah. All right, onward.
If the matter does not become known to the court, and so they don't circumcise him, when he reaches bar mitzvah, he is obligated to circumcise himself.
That does not necessarily mean that he gets out the sharp knife or flint or whatever and circumcise himself. If he can, great. It's complicated in terms of the nerve endings around the area. It's not actually as sensitive as you might think. It's also not completely free from discomfort. So the person might do it himself, or they would then engage a moil to do the circumcision. But once this kid is now 13, is fully upon him for him to be responsible to fulfill, because ultimately that's where the obligation lies, is on the individual. Good.
And if he doesn't, with each and every day that passes after he's reached bar mitzvah, he negates a positive commandment. He is not, however, liable for karet until he dies intentionally uncircumcised.
Right. So if you had a child, for example, that had been captured and as an infant and wasn't circumcised and lived his whole life, he was Jewish, but he didn't really know it, or maybe he knew it, but he didn't know that circumcision was something that Jews did. If he dies, he's not considered to be accountable for his lack of circumcision. On the other hand, if he was not circumcised by his family and the community never found out, and so they couldn't rectify it, he turns 13, he knows he should be circumcised, and he refuses to do it, he is now in violation of the commandment. And every day that he refuses to do it, he's still in violation of the commandment, but he is not considered subject to the karet until he has spent his entire life, all the way to the last day, refusing to be circumcised. Right? If there are inadvertent reasons why he can't be circumcised, as we'll see later, if there are medical reasons why he can't be circumcised, then none of this applies. This has to be an intentional act of rebellion, of willfulness, to say, I will not do it. And that has to go all the way through life. It can't be, I changed my mind at 50 and got circumcised. Well, too bad, too late. No. If you change your mind then, boom, you're fine. No karet, no punishment. Right? It's never too late until it's too late. Good? I mean, not good, but understood.
You're a rebellious teenager, you're not going to do it, but you get 55, 60 years old, you now learn more about duties and say, okay, now I can, and it's all right.
Exactly. Okay. Next section.
When a convert enters the congregation of Israel, he is obligated to undergo circumcision first.
Right. No one comes to Beit Din or mikvah until they have been circumcised.
If he had been circumcised while he was a Gentile.
That is to say, you were just part of a community where circumcision was normal for everybody.
Like America.
Hey, yes. Parts of ancient Egypt in the past, and some other cultures as well.
If he had been circumcised while he was still a Gentile, it is necessary to extract the blood of the covenant on the day that he converts. Right,
it's what's known as hatafat dam brit. You use a small little lancet right along the edge of where the foreskin had been, and a drop of blood is taken out, and that is I erased my brit. That is symbolic of the Brit Milah, because it's saying that Milah, just any old circumcision, has to be for the covenant. And since there's nothing left to circumcise, because the foreskin's gone, then we'll simply make a symbolic gesture that this is where it would be, and now we are marking it for this purpose. I have participated in this ceremony a few times, and it is remarkably pain-free.
Similarly, a child who was born without a foreskin must have blood extracted for circumcision on the 8th day.
Right. Again, we're not just anti-foreskin. Right? This is not that we don't like the foreskin. This is meant to be a sign. And therefore, if it's meant to be a sign, we've got to have a sign to say that this is for this purpose of remembering the covenant. So even if you were fortunate enough to be born without a foreskin, which is a genetic condition, there still needs to be the ceremony of hatafat dam brit, of marking this, because it's not just enough that the foreskin be missing. It has to be for the purpose.
Right, and the child has no awareness of this anyway.
Of course not.
Yeah. So it's not for the child, it's for the adult, for the father, to remember that he has a covenant with God too.
And to say that this state of being is not just about the material, it is about the spiritual. And we've got a shortcut on this case because we've already don't have to worry about a foreskin, but we still have to do something to mark that this is a spiritual state, not just a physical one.
An androgynous child, a child with both male and female sexual organs, must be circumcised on the 8th day. Similarly, a child born by cesarean section and the child who has 2 foreskins should both be circumcised on the 8th day.
Now, this is, might sound a little odd, like, why are we talking about this? I wanted to make sure that we included it because it's a wonderful reminder that of different sexuality have been known for quite a long time. It's not a modern topic, and there are many sections in Mishnah and Talmud that deal with these sorts of issues. And 2, that just because it's not part of the normal path doesn't mean that Brit Milah is not done. Or that it is not supposed to be done on the right day. That even those that are atypical are still brought into the typical Brit. I'm going to have to write my Brit Milah. Yeah. I'm going to keep pointing to it.
Nothing.
And I'm going to be pointing at an empty board. So that's going to drive me nuts. Okay. The Brit, no matter how atypical they may be physically. Okay, and that's going to come back a little bit later when we talk about the timing of which day we do it on. Keep going.
Circumcision is performed only during the day after the rising of the sun, as Leviticus states, on the 8th day, i.e., during the day and not at night.
Right, so emphasizing the word day as opposed to just like date. Right, it's during the daytime. So this is why you don't get invited to nighttime circumcision parties. It's during the day.
I imagine it's something like you don't wear tzitzit at night because you can't see them. You want to make sure that everybody can see this in the days before they had all this electric light.
It's partly that. It's also partly that circumcision as being a pseudo legal act of welcoming somebody into the covenant. Legal acts take place during the day, at least by preference.
Whether at the appropriate time, the 8th day, or after the appropriate time, from the 9th day onward, it still has to be during the day.
Exactly. So even if you're late on the circumcision, it still should be done during the day. So you don't say, oh, it wasn't on the 8th day, so on the 12th day, let's have it at midnight. No, on the 12th day, still have it at daytime.
So if you did it the wrong time, you might still have to draw a drop of blood sometime later.
There are some circumstances where that is true, yes. That digression too much, but yes.
If one performed the circumcision after dawn, it is acceptable. Nevertheless, it is a mitzvah to do it early in the beginning of the day, since the eager perform mitzvot early. Right.
Now, normally, in my experience, most people and most communities delay it a little bit after dawn.
Yes.
In order to be able to have a greater celebration. That those who would be there at a dawn circumcision are few and far between, and we want to make sure, for the honor of the child and the honor of the Brit, that we have a big to-do. It's another reason why it's always much preferable to do this outside of a medical facility, but to do it properly where you can have that feast and celebration in honor of Brit Milah.
A circumcision at its appropriate time, that is the 8th day, supersedes Shabbat. When not at its appropriate time, it does not supersede Shabbat or the festivals.
So this is major. There aren't that many things that trump Shabbat.
That's right.
So if the circumcision falls out on the 8th day, right? If that is the 8th day after birth, then the knife is there, right? And everything else that's needed for circumcision is there. And even though it is Shabbat, and on Shabbat we normally would never do something like this, but for Brit Milah, for that covenant, it is more foundational even than Shabbat. It's major. Now, as you can see, if it's not the appropriate day, that is to say, if it is not precisely the 8th day after birth, then you don't have to do it on Shabbat. And if you don't have to do it on Shabbat, it doesn't trump Shabbat. So if you wake up when you're 15 years old and decide, oh, you know what, I'm finally going to do it, I'm going to get circumcised, you wouldn't schedule it for Shabbat. And if you did schedule on Shabbat, then you would be violating Shabbat. Make sense?
And in the case where the baby was too ill after birth.
We're getting there. We're getting there.
All right. These are things that don't supersede Shabbat. A child who was born without a foreskin.
Right, for the obvious reason that this is the atypical that we mentioned before. And for atypical, where there's a little bit of doubt about how this is best done, we don't trump Shabbat, right? We only do it when it's clear that this is on Shabbat and needs to be exactly by this way. Next one is going to be really controversial.
Oh yeah, premature child who was born.
Well, don't use the word premature. It's, yeah.
A child who was born in the 8th month of pregnancy before his development was completed. He is considered to be a stillborn because he will not live.
All right, so there was a belief, this was more of a medical belief than a mitzvah belief, that children born in the 8th month weren't going to make it, right? That being born that early meant that you were going to die. Ironically, if you were born in the 7th month, it didn't hold. This is just the way their medical beliefs about gestation worked. Because of that belief, however, which was, again, based on faulty medical ideas, but it was based on medical ideas, the rabbi said, therefore, since the child is going to die, then we wouldn't supersede Shabbat for the circumcision. We would still circumcise, but we wouldn't supersede Shabbat for the circumcision. Nowadays, by the way, we all do circumcision on the 8th day, even if the child was born in the 8th month.
What confuses me is it's Shabbat, so you're not going to do the circumcision if he was born in the 8th month. But if you wait till the next day, he might be dead.
Well, yes.
Yeah.
So he would be.
Right, but you're not allowed to violate Shabbat for this, maybe. I mean, for a child that is in the medical opinion of the day is as good as dead. That was simply the way they conceived of children born at that time. Now, they didn't do anything actively to kill them, God forbid, but that was the assumption that they were going to die. And this is very reflective of what ancient infant mortality rates were like, and the anger and angst and tragedy that would befall every household. So the putting of this precaution in place made sense when infant mortality was what it was, and when their medical science, such as it were, gave them this opinion. But this is not something we would hold by today. But we will get to the health issue in a second.
A child born by cesarean section, an androgynous, and a person with 2 foreskins, these individuals are circumcised on Sunday, the 9th day of their lives, which of course contradicts the next to last paragraph on the previous page, which says a child born by cesarean and androgynous and 2 foreskins should be circumcised on the 8th day.
But not if the 8th day is Shabbat.
That's the difference.
Right. The difference is, for the atypical, we absolutely do the typical circumcision, but for the atypical, we do not do the circumcision on Shabbat. Because of being atypical, there is enough doubt that we wouldn't transgress Shabbat. For that doubt, we would wait for the next day when it was perfectly fine and we knew we were in the clear. Precaution in these unusual circumstances. Well, remember, cesarean used to be much different than now. I mean, cesarean was essentially killing the mother to save the child. It wasn't usually a survivable operation.
Yeah.
I mean, in any ancient world, I mean, having a slice in your abdomen that went down into your womb was not the kind of thing that you were going to recover from. That was a lethal wound, and without proper medical care in the modern world, it's still a lethal wound. We're just very lucky that we have that ability.
When a child is born,
Bein hashmashot, right?
Which is a period when it is undetermined whether it is considered day or night.
Right, the very end of twilight, right? So what day is it when you look up in the sky, right? Because remember, Judaism is not determined by what day is it on my watch. Right? Judaism is determined of where's the sun and where are the stars. And if you're just in that, the stars are coming out, but they're not kind of.
Yeah, the sun is setting, but the moon is there at the same time. Yeah.
So what do you do? Keep reading.
We don't know. We count from the night. And he is circumcised on the 9th day following the day he was born, which could be the 8th day.
Right, so we go ahead and we add a day, because circumcising early is also a problem. Right, a child shouldn't be circumcised on the 7th day. So if there's a doubt about what time it is, it's better to just simply assume that the child was born at night and count from there. And that may be the actual 9th day, but at least it's not the 7th day, because a circumcision on the 9th day is still valid. A circumcision on the 7th day is invalid. So we err on the side of that caution.
When a child is born bein hashmashot on Friday, his circumcision does not supersede the Sabbath prohibitions, because the Sabbath prohibitions are never superseded because of a doubtful situation. Rather, he should be circumcised on Sunday.
Right, so we push it off even more to make sure that we don't go into Shabbat, because it could have been that he was born the day before. but it could have been that he was not born the day before. So it could have been that we should have circumcised him on Friday, or it should be that we're supposed to circumcise him on Saturday. Since we're not sure, we'll just do it Sunday. So it's one more push off to make sure that we both get past 8 days definitely, and we don't, for an indefinite reason, transgress Shabbat.
Whose complexion is very yellowish.
I think you skipped one. A sick person.
Oh, sorry. A sick person should not be circumcised until he regains his health. 7 full days should be counted from the time he regains his health until he is circumcised.
Right, so that's anybody that's sick, adult or child, decision to make sure that the person is healthy.
And again, if that 7th day was a Shabbat,
You would postpone.
You postpone it.
Exactly, you would postpone.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
A child whose complexion is very yellowish,
What we call jaundice.
that's right, on the 8th day of his life, should not be circumcised until his blood recovers and his complexion returns to that of an ordinary, healthy child.
This is a situation that came up with my own son, Nathaniel. He was quite jaundiced when he was first born, and we had to postpone the circumcision. So he was circumcised a week after when he normally would have been circumcised.
Similarly, if his complexion is overly red, as if he had been painted, he should not be circumcised until his blood recovers and his complexion returns to that of an ordinary, healthy child. This is an example of sickness, and great care must be taken regarding this matter.
Right, so as important as the Brit Milah is, the life of the child also is rather important, in need of primary importance. And therefore, if there is any fear at all for the health or safety of a child, and these two are mere examples, they're not the only two things that could be a problem, then the circumcision should definitely be postponed. Right? Like for me, I was premature back in the 70s. That was even harder than it is today. So I was in ICU for about a month. My circumcision came after I got home. And that is perfectly normal. And every rabbinic authority would say absolutely right. You don't just go into the little, ICU, cubicle and do circumcision. You let the kid recover, and then you do the circumcision.
But it's an example of the covenant between us and God. It doesn't make you a Jew. You were a Jew anyway.
Correct, right. You are doing the sign of the covenant because you are a Jew. It doesn't actually create the covenant, right? It's the result of the covenant, not the beginning of the covenant. Has everyone got that? Because I've had some people who have been very unclear on that in my rabbinic career, that believe that if you don't do a circumcision, you're not a Jew. No. You are a Jew by virtue of your heritage and your inheritance, whether you are circumcised or not. And as we're going to see, there are certain cases where somebody may never be circumcised, and absolutely they are still Jewish in every way, shape, and form, and they are fully members of the covenant. And it is only because they are members of the covenant that if they don't do it, right? If they weren't part of the covenant, then how could they be held accountable for its terms? Okay.
When a woman circumcised her first son, and he died because the circumcision sapped his strength, and similarly, circumcised her second son, and he also died because of the circumcision, she should not circumcise her third son at the appropriate time. Rather, she should wait until he becomes older and his strength increases.
Right, so if you have precedent that there is a medical issue in this family, say, oh, well, God will take care of the kid. You say, no, this is a medical condition. I'm worried about the children because whether it be something that we now call hemophilia or other issues that might be genetic problems, this is not a good operation to take on these kids in this family. Even if
the first two children were sired by the same father or not, it doesn't matter. They have different fathers.
Right.
Still.
Because somebody might say, oh, and especially in the view of the ancient medical idea that the father contributed all the genetic material, what we'd call the genetic material, and the mother grew the seed. That was the way they conceptualized conception. Was the father had the seed and the mother was the soil, the carry, right? Even though they believed that, they still didn't say, oh, well, different fathers, don't worry about it. They still said, the kids come out and we've got this problem, wait until we get an all clear that this is going to be fine. And indeed, in this, like I said, in the modern world, where we know someone has hemophilia or other conditions that will absolutely render them under danger if they are circumcised, they can go their entire life without being circumcised. And that's not held against them in any way, shape, or form, and it certainly does not nullify the brit.
That's right. We're supposed to live by the commandments, not die by them.
Absolutely.
We
What's the
Sorry.
connection between hemophilia
The bleeding,
Bleeding?
yeah,
bleeding.
The-
Hemophilia, you don't stop bleeding. Once they cut you, you can't stop.
and especially for a child, but even for adults, if it's a very severe case, be very life-threatening.
Yes.
I mean, there are ways to treat it in the modern world, but even that treatment can be, so we don't intentionally do anything that could cause that to be a problem, if we know that it's a problem.
And it says, we should not circumcise a child who is afflicted with any sickness at all, since the danger to life takes precedence over everything.
Right? The kid has a cold, at that 8th day.
Oh, don't even.
No, you wait. Right? Let the kid get healthy.
Circumcision can be performed at a later date, while it is impossible to bring a single Jewish soul back to life.
One of the most beautiful bits of poetry in Rambam. Right? I can do this tomorrow. I can't bring the kid back. Let's wait. Right? Let's wait.
Circumcision may be performed by anyone, even a person who is not himself circumcised, or a slave, or a woman, or a minor may perform the circumcision if an adult male is not present.
Or more specifically, an adult male who knows what he's doing.
A Gentile, however, should not be allowed to perform the circumcision at all. Nevertheless, if he does so, there is no need for a second circumcision.
Right, so we get a question of l'hachila b'de'avad, of things that happen in advance. We would say don't do it, but if it did happen, it doesn't render it unfit. Right? You wouldn't have. Second circumcision here means the drawing of a drop of blood. If there's no foreskin, there's no way to circumcise twice. So the worry here, of course, is that a Gentile doing the circumcision is going to be doing it with a very different intentionality. We're going to talk about the blessing in just a moment, and therefore it would not be appropriate. However, if done, and the kid is okay.
question?
Yes.
A Jewish kid is born in the hospital,
Mhm.
and the doctor does the circumcision,
Right.
even though he's not Jewish.
Jewish, right?
Is this good by
So
the eyes of Judaism?
yes, and yes, but.
Yes, but
Right, so yes, it's okay after the fact. It's not the way it should be done. But if it happens that way, it happens that way. Except if it's happening before the 8th day. If it's happening before the 8th day, then hatafat dam brit, the drop, would still be appropriate as a way of saying this is for the brit, not just for the medical circumcision. Exactly. So. I think so. And sometimes that's been, in my experience, it's been necessary to work with families who have, in this topic, there's a lot of misinformation, a lot of anxiety, a lot of, and sometimes working with families, they can have their pediatrician do it, but there'll be a rabbi present in order to do the blessings, or the 8th day or later rather than earlier, solution to help make sure that the mitzvah happens rather than just letting it go, because some families are very intractable in this. One little bit of a commercial, if you find a good moil, and most communities will tell you who is a good moil that they know, it is a much smoother and a much more pleasant experience for child, mother, and community than the way most pediatricians are forced to do it according to insurance and hospital regulations. Because they have to strap the kid to this plastic thing, and it's a very preparation, which is traumatic for the child.
It's like an operation.
It was like an operation, yeah. So every circumcision that I've had to help with that was like that was much more distressing for everybody involved than all of the circumcisions, the vast majority that I've helped with that were done by an experienced moil who is at home or in the congregation, exactly, and everything is it just night and day difference. So strongly recommend to all of you, and even or anyone who's listening on the camera, get a proper moil.
yes.
You will be much happier, and it's much smoother for everybody. Right. And they do it all the time. It's nothing beats experience.
That's their specialty.
I think also done according to Hashem.
Of course. Well,
And that makes a big difference.
I mean, even in these outside circumstances, as they're talking about, it's after the fact and you get somebody who wasn't really the person who was supposed to be doing it, even then you're still doing it according to God and you're still, representing the breed. But doing it from the beginning in a way that accords with our tradition, it does work better. It just simply works better. All right, last two paragraphs, and then we're going to have to wrap it up.
The father of the child recites another blessing. Blessed are you, God, our Lord, King of the universe, who has sanctified us with his commandments and commanded us to have our children enter the covenant of Abraham, our patriarch.
Right, so this is the mark of entry into the covenant. Again, it doesn't actually move you into the covenant. Same way that somebody who has been circumcised that isn't Jewish doesn't automatically become Jewish. They still have to go to the mikveh and do Beit Din. But this is that ultimate sign of the Brit, of the covenant with God.
If others are present, they say, just as you have brought him into the covenant, so too may you bring him to Torah, marriage, and good deeds.
So that's the slight modification of the Rambam version. And then the Ashkenazic version, we take out the just as you part, and we say just as he has entered the covenant, may he also enter the Torah and a life of ma'asim tovim, of good deeds. So it's a slightly different verb, but the thought is the same, that the whole point of circumcision is what comes next, what comes with the Brit that is being constantly reminded to us by Milah of a life of Torah and a life of ma'asim tovim, and ultimately chuppah as well, the continuation into a new generation of the covenant. And Brit Milah, there is simply nothing more foundational in Judaism than this indelible act. Any final questions, comments?
I don't know if it's appropriate to do it maybe online, maybe let's keep it offline.
Okay, you want me to hit stop? Well, we'll go to your interesting question then. Wonder what happened.